What we do here is go back.
Hi, and welcome to Mr. Toyama's AP World History. This is Chapter 15, India in the Indian Ocean Basin. First up, our intro. During the post-classical period, there emerged in India no long-lasting imperial authority as there had in China and the Islamic world. Regional kingdoms were the norm. Nevertheless, Indian society exerted a profound influence on the cultures of South and Southeast Asia. Through the extensive trade networks of the Indian Ocean Basin, Indian forms of political organization, religion, and economic practices spread throughout the region. Several developments in India during this era gradually spread throughout the larger cultural zone. Number 1, dramatic agricultural growth fueled population growth and urbanization. These phenomena, combined with specialized industrial production and trade, resulted in unprecedented economic growth for the region. Number 2, India's central position in the Indian Ocean Basin resulted in it becoming a major clearinghouse for products of the voluminous maritime trade network that encompassed East Africa, Arabia, Persia, Southeast Asia, and Malaysia, as well as the entire Indian subcontinent. And finally, Islam originally appeared in India through a variety of conduits and eventually became the primary religion of 1/4 of the population. From India, Islam, along with Hinduism and Buddhism, spread to the Southeast Asia and nearby islands. All right, so first up, after India, after the fall of the Gupta dynasty. In the past, we've talked about the Gupta dynasty as being one of the last large cultural kingdoms of India during the classical period. But with the invasion of the White Huns from Central Asia beginning in 451 CE, the Gupta state basically collapses by the mid-6th century. Now, I do want to make a note here that if we've been talking for a while, once we get to CE compared to BCE, when we say the century, so for example, the mid-6th century, we're actually talking about the 550s because you're always talking about the century before because it has to do with the fact that there was no zero century. So when we talk about the first century, we're talking about like the tens, and then we talk about the second century, we're talking about the first century, we're talking about the first 100 years, right? And then we're talking about the second century, which would be 100 to 199, and so on and so forth. So the Gupta state collapsed by the mid-6th century. There's chaos in northern India, local power struggles, as we've talked about before. When there's no large centralized imperial authority, basically regional sub-kingdoms pop up or regional sub-dominions pop up. The invasion of Turkish nomads. What area of India are they crossing? This is kind of a little bit of a review. We've talked about this place in the past. Alexander used it. Darius I used it. And eventually the Genghis Khan will use it. It is the Khyber Pass. I want you to make sure you know about the Khyber Pass. This is one of those great things that you can kind of talk about when you talk about change and continuity over time. This is something that stayed the same. Many invaders into India use the Khyber Pass to arrive at India at different points, and it's a very wide pass that kind of leads into the Indian subcontinent and allows for the easy mobility of troops into this area. Next, the Turkish nomads were absorbed into Indian society. What system was the Turks being assimilated to? Basically, what was the social class system that we've talked about in the past with India? Make sure you know this, the caste system. Next, we're going to talk about King Harsha. He ruled from 606 to 648 CE. He was a Buddhist. I've kind of made some color changes to some of my notes because there's a couple different religions, actually 3 in total, going on during this time, and I want you to make sure you're keeping kind of a color code in your head going well. Number 1, temporary restoration of unified rule in North India. Harsha is one of the few rulers during this post-classical period that's able to unify rule in northern India under his control. The reasons for this go as follow. He was religiously tolerant, meaning that even though he was on the cusp of the Arabic world and the Islamic world, he was religiously tolerant. Being a Buddhist himself, he saw that whatever religion people were practicing, he was open to allowing them to continue their practice of that religion. He was also very generous in his support for the poor. At one time, he, for 75 days, gave gifts for 500,000 people, and he also built many hospitals, which provided free medical care. He was a patron of the arts. A patron is someone who gives money to artists to be able to create their art. So, for example, he was very interested in theater, so he even wrote 3 plays. Eventually, he was assassinated, and there was no successor to be able to retain control. We talked about in my classroom a little bit about how The problem oftentimes in history with strong leaders is that they really don't have anyone after them to take on the reins of that powerful figure. We have a few exceptions, like, for example, in Rome, we have Julius Caesar, who's able to pass on to his adopted son Octavian the ability to rule over Rome. But then again, his adoption, in that he was someone who was chosen rather than given to him as a son, shows his power was kind of instilled in him and kind of bred in him as a result of being someone who was being watched by the previous leader. When we think about, for example, Alexander the Great, he had his 4 generals, and when they asked who should rule after him, the story goes that Alexander, with his last breath, said, "to the strongest," meaning that he really did want those generals of his to fight it out. And sadly, that whole system of fighting it out kind of led to really the breakup of his empire, because Alexander was a bitter old man at this point who saw that a bitter young man who saw that no one should be as successful or carry on his legacy but him. So there's this kind of thing that happens with people like King Harsha. There's no one behind him who really can take up the reins where he left off. Next, I want to talk about the introduction of Islam to northern India. As you can see on the map here, we have Harsha's kingdom in the north of India, in the Indian subcontinent, but we also have this area called Sindh, which is northwest India. Around 711 CE, the Arabs from Afghanistan and the Middle East come in and conquer the area known as Sindh. Sindh stood at the fringe of the Islamic world and kind of represents one of the last major borders that classical Islam really kind of pushes into. Harsha is kind of this kingdom that's stopping the expansion of Islam as a political power, but with a heterodox population, hetero meaning multi or diverse, and dox having to do with religion. Their population is really mixed, and it's not really enforced as a purely Islamic state, even though the area of Sindh is held by the Abbasid dynasty to 1258 CE. Merchants in Islam. Some of the things that we've been talking about is how trade affects the spread of information, ideas, and religion. Arabic trade with India predates Islam. Many married local women and integrated into society. There was a domination of trade between India and the West to the 15th century. What importance does this have to the economy of Islam and the Islamic states? If you think about it, Islam is able to grow really rich as a result of this trade and trade network system. Islam is a religion as well as a political structure, and one of the big things that Islam has going for it as it builds these dynasties is the ability to travel, trade. Muhammad was a merchant. He was also a warrior, but through his merchant aspect of his job and his daily life, he was able to grow pretty wealthy as a result of being a trader, and many Muslims follow in his footsteps as being a trader and trading not only their ideas about Islam along those routes, but also the goods, which eventually in turn bring in taxes and finance to the areas of the Islamic world that didn't have it before. They established local communities in India, and specifically the port city of Cambay, the most important trading center in India from 500 to 1500 CE. Next, we talk about Mahmud Ghazni. He's an Islamic ruler. He's a leader of the Turks in Afghanistan. He led raids into India from 1001 to 1027. He plunders and destroys Hindu and Buddhist temples and often built mosques atop these ruins. I want you to think, I'm going to give you a couple seconds, what does this do to the religious structures of the local groups? So if you think about it, it wouldn't have much success in persuading Indians to convert to the religion, but it did disrupt the practice of Buddhism, leading to its eventual decline. What we have to start doing, as we are already on chapter 15, and there's only 38 chapters to the textbook, I kind of want you to start to process throughout these next chapters as we go forward, kind of looking at some larger ideas of compare and contrast, but also being able to answer some cause and effect style questions that lead you to larger understandings of what is happening in the world. Next, we have the Sultanate of Delhi. It's Islamic. The consolidation of Mahmud's raiding territory, which was brought together under the Sultanate. The capital is at Delhi. It had a strategic importance between the Punjab and Ganges Valley. Here's the issue that we haven't talked about yet. One of the big ideas in world history is that most of civilization and most of the cultures that are very successful end up in river valleys. We think about the Ganges River Valley, we think about the Punjab River Valley, we think about the different river valleys that we've studied in the past, specifically like the Tigris and the Euphrates River Valley, and we've talked about a few others, specifically China along the Yellow River. Those river valleys lead to agricultural surplus and agricultural boon that is able to be translated into population growth and establishment of civilization and empires that lead from those areas. By having Delhi between the Punjab and Ganges Valley, they're basically drawing resources from two different very, very successful agricultural centers and also cultural centers at the time. It ruled North India from 1206 to 1526. It had a weak administrative structure, but it had a reliance on the cooperation of Hindu kings. 19 out of 35 sultans who were Muslim were assassinated, and it played a large role in establishing Islam in the Bengal region. When you rely on this, when you have a weak administrative structure, you're able to rely more on regional kingdoms. So if you don't, as we've talked about, have a very strong central imperial authority, you may have a modified version of power in that you are recognized as strong or kind of powerful in terms of maybe army or ruling prestige, but you might have a weak administrative structure that relies more heavily on local control and kind of a kind of impromptu relationship between yourself as the ruler and the local rulers on a smaller regional level. You are in charge, but in reality, the local regional rulers are the ones that are collecting taxes, and if they decide to support you and really see you as valuable, they will then help you out, which will really end up helping you as a ruler. The Hindu kingdoms of southern India. There's the Chola kingdom, 850 to 1267 CE. It was a maritime power, meaning ocean and navy power. Not highly centralized. It was highly autonomous. It ruled regions as long as they maintained order and paid taxes. What is this empire compared to? Rome, one of my favorite empires. Then we get the kingdom of Vijayanagar, the city of victory. From the mid-14th century to 1565, it was in the northern Deccan region. Originally supported by the Sultanate of Delhi, their leaders renounced Islam in 1336, which is not going to lead to the Sultanate being very happy, yet they maintain relations with the Sultanate who are Muslims. If you think about one of the issues within world history is there's only a few things that tie people together outside of regional and clan and family support. You have religion and you also have money. Religion is one of those things that really binds people together because if you believe that there's a God and you believe that that God sees all of you and maybe your religion teaches that you're all brothers and sisters or you're all equal, then you'll treat each other the same and you'll be nice to one another. Or if at the very least God is watching you and he'll make sure that you're punished if you're bad or mean to the other people. The other thing that binds people together is money and trade. If you are one of the people that really doesn't like Islam, but you really like making money, you still will find ways to trade with the Islamic traders because they make you money. Many times, if you think about it, one of the things that really happens in our world today is people don't like to give their money to political causes or restaurants or businesses that seem to have a political agenda. But as long as they don't really rub it in your face or really make a big stand about it, we'll continue to give our money. So, for example, let's say you went to a store down the street from your house, and one day they put up a sign that says, I'm going to vote for whichever political party you don't like. Well, now that has kind of caused a conflict in maybe you saying, I don't want to go to that store because they're going to vote for that person, or they're going to vote for this person, or this idea. And what you might have to do is stop going to that store. Whereas if they never put that sign up in the first place, you would never know, and you would just continue to buy like their hamburgers or their shoes or whatever they sell at that place. The major states of post-classical India from 600 to 1600 CE. Here's kind of the general concept I want you to kind of keep in mind as we talk about this post-classical period during this time. In the north, we were mostly talking about Muslim and Islamic lands and rulers. Basically because of the Khyber Pass and the Hindu Kush Mountains, which butt up against Afghanistan, which is, again, touching the Middle East, with those regions being under mostly Muslim and Islamic control, we're able to see kind of a growing sense of northern India slowly becoming more and more Islamic, whereas the southern part of India is becoming more and more Hindu, as it is far enough away from the areas of Islamic rule. The general concept also for this time period is there is no centralized imperial states compared to other post-classical societies. There are some sections, for example, such as Harsha's kingdom, which are pretty large and expansive, but the Chola kingdom, for example, isn't as large as other post-classical societies. And as you can see in some areas on the map, we have Vijayanagar on the map, and it's a little bit bigger than the Chola kingdom, but for the same issues, we're not really talking about very large regions on a map other than, for example, Harsha, who is the exception. Now, here are 3 things that made post-classical India work. Number 1, trade. Money and trade made religious, tribal, ideological issues not as important. Again, like I talked about before, if you see that person in the store putting up that sign about the political party you don't like, it kind of might offend you. But you want to continue to buy their goods, and they also don't want to put up that sign in their store because they know that they're going to turn off some people from their product. So what they're going to do instead is be apolitical or not have any religious or tribal or ideological issues, meaning that they're going to make more money, and trade continues on, which makes the world go round. There were common social structures, strong leaders, kingdoms, religious tolerance, reliance on trade. There was a merchant class, the caste system. Everyone kind of understood these ideas. They understood their place in this world. They understood why they were doing what they were doing within that sphere of the globe. And this common social structure made it more convenient and more understandable of why people were doing what they were doing. And finally, they had inherited cultural traditions. There's a lot of things that bind people together. Some of them are cultural traditions outside of religious traditions. If you think about, for example, in the United States, we have the 4th of July. That is an apolitical and apolitical celebration. You can be pretty happy that some guys a long time ago signed some document on July 4th, and you blow some stuff up with fireworks and eat hot dogs. That has nothing to do with religion. It has nothing really that much to do with politics. It's just a celebration of our country and something that happened a long time ago. And this inherited cultural tradition binded people together during post-classical India, allowing them to see themselves in more common light. There was agriculture in the monsoon world. I need you to make sure you're understanding the agricultural process with the monsoon, specifically in India. During spring and summer, the rains and wind came from the southwest, and the fall and the winter was known as the dry season, with the wind coming from the northeast. They used seasonal irrigation, crucial to avoid drought and famine, meaning they save some of the water, especially in southern India where a lot of the water can dry out very quickly. And then there's massive construction of reservoirs, canals, and tunnels. I'm going to give you a couple seconds to define those 3 words and explain their role in relation to water, because knowing what each of those things does helps to support our understanding of how agriculture works during this time. All right, so reservoirs, for example, are large containers of water that are covered usually and saved the water to be given to the fields once the dry season hits. So reservoirs, for example, will hold on to water, that thousands of gallons at a time usually, and when the dry season comes and the crops need more water, they'll slowly use it like a storage of water to water the crops. Canals allow for the transportation of boats, which can then allow for the transportation of food and agriculture along those routes using the water. And finally, tunnels, which oftentimes covers water and allows for transportation of water to keep it sterile, to keep it cleaner than it would if it would be out in the elements, or if it accidentally got mixed in with agricultural runoff or farm runoff or human waste runoff, which is super disgusting to use and mix in with your crops. Here's the trading world of the Indian Ocean Basin from 600 to 1600 CE. There's trade routes in the dark purple thin lines all over the place, traveling all over, and you can see that basically the whole structure of the Silk Road has now moved out into the Indian Ocean and into a large part of the Pacific and the Arabian Sea. You can see the green line showing the monsoon winds from between April and September, and you can see the purple lines of the monsoon winds traditionally from November to February. We saw a video of this a couple chapters ago, and I showed you. Population growth in India goes back to our big truths of world history. When you are able to see a population growth, it's usually as a result of agricultural surplus, specifically during India and their understanding of agriculture and their cultivation of agriculture. They're able to see a growth over about a 5 to 800 year span. From 600 CE to 800 CE, there's a 20% growth. 800 CE to 1000 CE, 25% growth, and then finally 1000 CE to 1500 CE, the population is nearing its top out point for this period at 105 million peoples. Trade and economic development in southern India. The Indian regional economies are largely self-sufficient because of large-scale urbanization. People are moving to cities. They're becoming tradesmen. They're basically doing all the things that we talked about in earlier chapters about culture and organization of society. Certain products are traded throughout the subcontinent, and certain products were made and traded within regions of India, specifically iron, copper, salt, and pepper. When we think about India, we oftentimes think about how India is a trading region, but sometimes, and in some ways, India was not trading outside of itself. India did trade within its region iron, copper, salt, and pepper. How is this done? Iron from mines in India given to Indians to make iron goods. Copper is mined in India for Indians to make copper goods. Salt from the Indian Ocean given to Indians, doesn't need to be coming out from faraway places, and pepper from pepper trees grown in India for Indians. If you get the pattern, you kind of understand what's going on. Southern India profits from political instability in the north. How would a region's instability lead to larger profits for the surrounding regions? Give you a minute to think about that. Here's what it is. When you think about a region's instability, like we have in our map, let's go all the way back actually to look at it. When we look at this map, the political instability in the north led to a trade boon or a trade success for southern India. One of the main reasons for this is because of the instability of the Silk Road over land, the traders that were trying to still force themselves to make money, trying to make a living, they decided to move into the Indian Ocean Basin and the Indian Ocean Trade Network, which only really, has this place, Calcutta and Quilon, to be able to trade with. And you completely come around all the political instability of northern India. You don't even have to land in Cambay or Surat if you didn't need to. You can continue on to Aden, Hormuz, Siraf, Basra, Baghdad, Alexandria, Cairo, any of these places outside of those trades networks. And so by having political instability in the north, you are, I went too far. By having political instability in the north, you are able to make more money in the region in the south. Next, temples in Indian society. More than religious centers. I want you to make sure that in Indian society, you understand that temples are not just places of prayer and worship. They had a couple different functions as well. Large-scale agricultural projects sometimes employed hundreds of people, Brahmins, priests, musicians, servants, etc. The center of coordination of irrigation and other agricultural work. Many times in the post-classical period, we have in India water and irrigation systems flowing to temples. If you think about a temple, one of the main things you think about is fountains at a temple. And fountains for a very long time, for most of world history, were places where people got clean drinking water, washing water, dishes water, all these kind of water that you need came to the fountains at the temples, and people would come there daily, grab their water, take their pot full of water home, and they were good. Also, because of some of the patrons of these temples giving up their land in service of their religion, there is large agricultural land that can be done or can be used for agricultural work within the region. Also agricultural work such as processing seeds, processing food into edible forms. If you think about, for example, rice has to be picked, it has to be shooked, which means taken off of the plant part and organized and put into bags. All that was done at temples. And at those temples, there were storage reserves of food for droughts, for the needy, for the homeless, for those that are in need of food. Some temples had large land holdings as a result of the donation system. They were also education providers for boys and some specialization in trade. There was also banking services such as tax collection and loans given out. So how did temple communities become wealthy institutions? Well, there you go. Do you really think that you're going to be a very poor community if you're the one that's handing out storage reserves of food for people during a drought? And then when the drought is over, they're going to remember your kindness and probably patronize your temple. Also, if you're the main source of water, do you think you're going to make lots of money either selling your water or providing access to your water? Are you going to run out of money if you're being paid for education, for reading for young boys, people trying to climb social ladders? Are you also going to run out of money if you are a bank providing tax collection and loans? So temple communities become wealthy institutions as a result of their diversification of services for the people of Indian society. Next, we have cross-cultural trade in the Indian Ocean Basin. Trade increases in the post-classical period, mostly because of monsoons, but also because of improvements in technology. There were larger ships, meaning larger cargo. Basically, around 1000 CE, they were able to carry 100 tons, which is 100 times 2,000 pounds. So that's 200,000 pounds, right? Yeah, 200,000 pounds. Just double-checking my math there. On the left-hand side, we had dhows, which used triangular sails, a more recent invention in world history that was able to better capture wind, better able to steer, navigate on the open sea. And in the more Asian countries, such as China, we have what's called junks or junks. They have kind of that like fish or dragon style looking canvas. What's nice about them is they are waterproof. They also are able to be steered. They're also able to work against the wind, meaning that it can still travel along forward even though the wind is pushing at the boat. And it really was a technological advancement that was unheard of up to this point at 1000 CE. Next, there is the establishment of emporia, a big important word I need you to know. The cosmopolitan port cities serve as warehouses for trade. I like to compare this to Walmart. Emporia is the one-stop shop for everything you need. If you want to buy a glue stick and some shoes and a Hello Kitty pencil and a Steven Universe t-shirt and TV and some apples and some milk and some cheese and, I don't know, toenail clippers, you're not going to be able to just go to Ralph's or to a normal grocery store to pick those things up. You need to go to a big super center, as we call them nowadays, like Walmart, right? And with Walmart, you can go in there and there's goods from all over the world, and there's multiple goods from all different kinds of places, and they all provide different things, but you can have a one-stop shop to go in there and get it. India became the place of emporia, and emporia is where everybody from all over the world came, dropped off all their goods, was able to have one-stop shopping for goods returning home. There was no need for a Chinese trader to travel all the way to Cairo to get the goods that he was looking for. Traders from Cairo came to India, traders from China came to India, and when they met there, they were able to trade their goods, returning, making the trip basically halved, which is great for traders and great for culture as it is traveling along those roads. It also made the port cities of India massively wealthy because of tariffs, trade, and other kind of taxes that go along with this type of trade. There was an improved organization of agricultural efforts, cotton and other trade crops. Cotton is pretty much useless if you do not have the ability to turn it and spin it into clothing. Cotton, number one, grows really low. You grab some of the cotton fibers from the plant. Inside of those fibers, there are seeds that are very sharp and they can hurt your fingers. So what you have to do is, number one, have somebody to grab the cotton or pick the cotton from the plants. Then you need to have somebody to pick out all the seeds from the plants. Then you need to have somebody to organize and collect all of the cleaned cotton into large bales. Then from there, you need to have somebody who takes the bales and processes the cotton into thread. From there, you need to have somebody who can dye the thread if it's going to be some sort of dyed wool or dyed cotton product. And from there, it needs to be passed on to another person who then organizes the creation of the garments, and then from there, it needs to be traded on to a trader. That organizational process that I just described needed to have the emporia system and the larger trading network that was needed to create clothes in an efficient way. Other trade crops also need to have processing as a part of that, and it needed to have this trade network to be able to be processed correctly. Specialized products are developed, cotton specifically, high carbon steel. These were highly prized materials and they had high value. This enables thousands of artisan jobs. Again, this opening of the caste system to the jati that we've talked about before in the past and their specialization of labor during this time. The kingdom of Aksum. I know that in the map it's spelled differently, but this is just kind of how I'm going to spell it. It's an example of trade-driven development. Founded in the highlands of northern Ethiopia about the 1st century CE, they adopt Christianity and they displace Kush as the Egyptian link to the south. Aksum destroys the Kushan capital Meroe in around 360 CE, and its major territorial expansion to late 6th century. This kingdom could not exist without the Indian Ocean trade network. Egypt is known for being a very fertile land, especially along the Nile, and we talked about some of the kingdoms in our first 8 chapters about their establishment in, again, a river valley. And one of the things that Aksum is able to really grow from is their basically part of the Indian Ocean Basin route. You cannot get to Cairo, Memphis, Jerusalem, or to Europe without, or even Mecca, without going through Aksum during this time. There was obelisks at Aksum. I know this picture's a little grainy, but you can see down there's little people and a man on a horse, and these are called stelae. They're very large kind of picture or statues that basically look like that in the background. Some of them have been broken. They were some of the cultural iconography or cultural touchstones that people kind of had when they thought of Aksum, and they're slowly being broken over time and earthquakes and other such problems. Changes to caste society. Changes to caste and society, excuse me. Migrations. How does migration affect a society? A couple things. Number one, it changes the structure of society. It changes how people think. It changes the relationship between people like men and women. It changes the relationship between people and money. It changes the relationship in all different kinds of way when people move. It just upsets the whole system. The growth of Islam leads to more equality. Men and women are seen as more equal, and so also is the structure of Indian society. The caste system only works under Buddhism and Hinduism, mostly Hinduism. But Islam argues that as brothers and sisters under Allah, we cannot be unequal. Urbanization, easy to change groups and break tradition. If you think about those of you that live in small cities, it is oftentimes very hard to do anything without the whole town or a bunch of people that you know your business. If you move into an urban setting, you might be one of millions of people living in a specific city, and most people don't really care what you do or why you do it. So it's easy to change your group, find new friends, make new enemies, but also to break tradition. You don't want to go to church or temple or mosque or whatever. You don't have to go to church or temple or mosque because no one's really going to keep track of you in a giant city. Whereas in small towns, without urbanization, you're able to be easily noticed when you are not present at large religious gatherings. Economic development. We get the development of jati, which are subcastes. We talked about that before. They're similar to workers' guilds. I want you to think about like unions, basically controlling the production value, production price, controlling the quality of the good that's being made, specifically cotton jati and iron, high carbon steel jati. The caste system expands from north to south, promoted by temples and the educational system. Decline of Buddhism. Buddhism displaced as Turkish invasions destroy holy sites and temples. As the Turks invaded, they did what Mahmud Ghazini did before. They displaced those holy sites and temples and created in their place mosques. What's great about this system for those who conquered it, specifically the Turks, is when the traders showed up, they said, oh, what happened to the Buddhist temple? And they say, no more temple, now mosque. And they say, oh, okay, whatever, let's keep trading. And they continue on their way. So the disruption to trade wasn't really affected that much because, again, people like to make money more than they like to fight about religion. In 1196, Muslim forces destroy the library of Nalanda, which we talked about in chapters previous, a large blow to the university-style system of India, and thousands of monks are exiled or kicked out of India. Well, my question is, where do they go? Basically to East Asia. That's how Buddhism eventually will spread through force after the decline of Buddhism to Southeast Asia, where it now has taken root in places like China, Japan, Indonesia, Korea, places like that. Development of Hinduism, growth of devotional cults. Now, Hinduism originally was based around a system and a structure of beliefs, but as Hinduism eventually evolves, there is more of a emphasis on devotion towards individual gods and goddesses, specifically a couple that are involved with larger ideas or concepts or seen as like the higher order gods. We have, for example, Vishnu. He's a god who lives in heaven. He helps people. He has a lot of stories revolved around him, and he's seen as kind of like in the same way Jesus stories are known in the West for most of like America and Europe. Vishnu stories are kind of known just like common parlance and common sayings that go in everyday life. We have Shiva, the god of creation and destruction. Same thing goes there, that this kind of concept of Shiva being one who helps to create things but also destroy things and kind of keeping her happy is an important part of life. There's a promise of salvation that transitions during this time. You could be saved from pain. Hinduism before was about living a moral and righteous life, similar to some of the non-religious doctrines but more philosophical approaches to life. Development of Hinduism changes, however, during this time, that people can actually be saved or release themselves from the pain of life, death, rebirth process, and they could be saved into a higher, more like blissful existence, especially popular in southern India, and it spreads eventually to the north. We have devotional philosophers. We have Shankara. He's a Brahmin or a priest philosopher of the 9th century CE. He was a devotee of Shiva. He synthesized Hindu writings in Platonic form, meaning that he kind of forced the writings of some of Hinduism, which can be very complex, which can be very expansive, into a more Platoistic form of question and answers, and a more like Western understanding of what we would say as knowledge, being able to ask a question and receive a very formulated answer. He preferred rigorous logical analysis to emotional devotion, kind of like a very thoughtful type of religion versus having kind of like an ecstatic or existential kind of feeling towards the gods and goddesses. Ramanjua is a Brahmin philosopher in the 11th to early 12th century. He challenges Shankara's emphasis on logic. He says that there's just too much logic. In religion, you're not supposed to focus on logic. You're supposed to focus on emotional devotion. The gods are trying to reach us at a level that cannot be ascertained through our brains, but more of our, what we would call our heart, right? And it laid the philosophical foundations of contemporary Hinduism. So in this argument, Shankara really loses out to Ramanjua because in Hinduism really adopts more of a emotional and a more like feelings-based version of Hinduism. And like for many people who were seeing Shankara's version of the Platonic kind of synthesized Hinduism, they don't really like the rigorous logical analysis in comparison to the tradition of what Hinduism came out of. Conversion to Islam. By 1500, there is 25 million converts to Islam. It's a quarter, or 25% of the total populations. There was possibilities of social advancement for lower caste Hindus. If you're in the Hindu system, you have to buy into the caste system. The gods have placed you in your caste. Live your life there. If you're a good person, you'll come back. It'll be awesome and better for you. But if you're a Muslim, you get one life. Allah did not place you in the caste system. Allah sees you all as equal and has decided that all of you need to be loving and brothers and sisters. So you would actually reject the caste system as a result of this and allowed for social advancement based on your ability to work. In Islam, it's about what you can do and what you can provide versus where you're born and what your family is. Rarely was achieved, though, whole caste or jati convert, and basically social status remains consistent. Sufis are a branch of Islam. They're more mystical. They believe in a personal, emotional, devotational approaches to Islam. They believe that Allah should be a personal God. He's not far away, but he kind of interacts with you on a daily basis. It should be emotional, that you should not just kind of quietly go about your 5 prayers a day or giving of alms, but you should feel the passion that Allah feels for creation, or you should feel the love that Allah has for his creation. And devotational, meaning that you are more involved in your prayer life and spiritual life than other Muslims would be. We also get important missionaries of Islam to India. What's great about the Sufi religion to those in India is a couple things. Number one, Islam is very rigid and structured and very political also during this time. For many Indians, they see themselves as being culturally Indian but also religiously Indian in their Hinduism. The missionaries that come within their branch of Islam, being Sufi specifically, provide something that Islam doesn't always have, specifically the personal, emotional, and devotional aspects of Islam that are very similar to what they understand as religion in Buddhism and Hinduism within India. So these missionaries, when they come, are speaking the same language, sort of what the people are already used to in terms of religion for India. Finally, they also had some flexibility in regarding local customs. Sufis are not super staunch in terms of having certain practices being thrown out the window completely. I think it would be very hard for any of you who have ever converted to a new religion or have adopted a religion to go from celebrating one type of festival to completely abandoning that festival and still looking at the calendar and realizing, man, if I was still in that old religion, then I guess I would be, eating and drinking and having the day off. But within the Sufi branch of Islam, some local customs, specifically religious tradition, or excuse me, not religious traditions, but cultural holidays, cultural practices are still acceptable because they don't see them as violating the tenets of Islam. Then we get the Bhakti Movement, attempting to bring Hinduism and Islam closer together. This is syncretism again, if you want to make a little star note right here. 12th century Southern Hindu movement. It spread to the north. It was done by Guru Kabir. He taught that Shiva, Vishnu, and Allah are all manifestations of one deity, meaning that Shiva, that Vishnu, Allah are just the same guy, different names, and most people just need to be on the same page and understand that, hey, they're not that different, so we just need to kind of blend together some of the things. Allah says love your neighbor, so does Vishnu and Shiva. Allah says pray, a certain number of times a day, so does Vishnu and Shiva. So he tried very hard to blend together and make people see that the religions were not as different as they thought. It was very unsuccessful because at this time there's kind of an established order to Islam. Yes, there's Sunni and Shia at this time, but they pretty much are set in their ways. There are some smaller branches of Islam that are broken off, like for example with the Sufis, but also at this time it's pretty much kind of established what orthodox practice of Islam is. Same thing with Hinduism. By this time, there's only small variations in terms of how people practice Hinduism, and they already have kind of started to notice, especially the practitioners, that there isn't really a common ground that both parties can agree to. So the Bhakti movement is largely unsuccessful. Indian influence in Southeast Asia. Influence dates from 500 BCE. There's evidence of Indian ideas and traditions, specifically kingship. Religions like Hinduism and Buddhism. There's literature, and the caste system is not as influential. We'll talk about that another time when we get back to Southeast Asia. The early states of Southeast Asia, we have Funan, the lower Mekong River, which today is parts of Cambodia and Vietnam. From the 1st to 6th century CE, it's important because of the trade route from China to India through the Isthmus of Kra. We talked about it being one of the stops on the Indian Ocean Basin trade network. The kingdom of Srivijaya. Centered in Sumatra. They're both Hindu and Buddhist from 670 to 1025 CE, and the Kingdom of Angkor, which is modern Vietnam and Cambodia, from 889 to 1431 CE. It had magnificent religious city complexes. I would reread this section just to kind of keep all these guys straight and make sure that you know why they're important to our textbook. Here are the picture and the map of the early states of Southeast Asia. There's Funan and Srivijaya. You can see in purple, we have Sumatra, a little bit of Java, Borneo, the Malay Peninsula, the Isthmus of Kra. But then we also see Funan, which is like up in kind of like southern China, and their large city, Ak-Ao. And then the later states of Southeast Asia, we have Angkor, Singosari, and Majapahit. We see down in Java, the area of Majapahit, we have kind of next to it Singosari, and Angkor kind of takes over where that southern Chinese area we talked about a little before. Islam in Southeast Asia. Early populations of Muslim traders bring trade and religion to Southeast Asia. Their increasing popularity with Sufi or mystical activity, as I referenced before, and many converts retain some Hindu or Buddhist traditions. The state of Malacca is founded in the 14th century CE by rebellious Prince of Sumatra. Dominated maritime trade routes. They were mostly pirates. So when you think about one of the great kind of funny things of world history, there was a whole state that was run by pirates. Pirates are terrible, awful people, but, it's a little silly during that time. Mid-15th century, they all pretty much convert to Islam. We made it to the end. When you have finished studying this chapter, you should be able to do the following. Number 1, explain the reasons behind the quest for centralized imperial rule and the introduction of Islam to northern India. Number 2, compare and contrast the Hindu kingdoms of southern India. Number 3, explain and discuss the key aspects of agriculture in the monsoon world. Number 4, outline the features of trade and economic development in southern India. Number 5, identify the important aspects of cross-cultural trade in the Indian Ocean Basin. Number 6, identify the connections between caste and society in post-classical India. Number 7, compare and contrast the expansion of Hinduism and Islam throughout post-classical India. And finally, number 8, compare and contrast the influence of Indian civilization within Southeast Asian states. Writing assignment, 5 to 8 sentences. Number 1, how did India manage to exert a significant influence on other cultures in the Indian Ocean Basin during this era without ever establishing any long-term centralized political institutions? Number 2, was the caste system in India during the post-classical era fundamentally a rigid social system or a flexible one? Be able to defend your position. Doesn't really matter which one you pick, just as long as you can defend it. And number 3, how did Islam become so prevalent and entrenched in Indian society during this period as compared to Buddhism and Hinduism, for example, that had actually been born in India? If you were to watch a video that might help you to understand a little more, this is one that I think would be something of value to spend your time watching. It's only about an hour long. It's BBC's The Story of India, back to our old friend Michael Wood, the very eccentric scarf-wearing man from the BBC. He goes on talking about the ages of gold, and he goes really in depth into some of the religious aspects that I didn't get a chance to talk to or didn't really feel like talking to. As always, it has been great talking to you. Time to reread your book, and I even updated my smiley to a pretty fun little sunglasses emoji. Hope you all do really well on your tests, and I'll see you all soon. Thanks. Bye.
What we do here is go back.